Hey YouTube, James here. Wanted to make a video talk about Sorcerer survivability. As many of you guys know, Sorc is a character that's designed to be very kind of glass cannon-y. So not great base survivability. Some interesting abilities that are supposed to make up for it, but I think as a lot of people are realizing, really are not making up for what's a pretty big survivability hit as you get up into the higher nightmare dungeons. So wanted to make this video to go over some of the things that I've used to increase my survivability and to be able to kind of thrive in higher level nightmare dungeons. If you guys want to refer to my video that I recently posted showing some solo 62 to 66 nightmare dungeons on my Hardcore Sorc, please have a look at that. And you can see kind of some of what the survivability looks like for a Sorc if you kind of build it properly with the right defensive attributes. So let's get into it. I think for survivability, there's really a couple components. So first of all, the skills that you're running is important. It's a starting point. Many of you probably are already running sort of the same sort of setup, the base setup in terms of having multiple defensive skills like Frost Nova, Ice Shield, Flame Shield, and Teleport. These are all very, very popular skills. They're all on the defensive tree. They can all be boosted by an amulet that has +3 to all defensive skills. And as you guys know, there are skills in the skill tree that will allow you to generate a barrier when you use each of these. So they all have defensive aspects to them. Teleport, when you teleport, you gain 30% damage reduction, which is a lot of damage reduction. Flame Shield obviously makes you immune for a couple of seconds. You can see at rank 4, you have 2.3 seconds of immunity, fairly decent cooldown in less than 15 seconds. Ice Armor generating a good amount of barrier, and as you deal damage, you're growing the amount of that barrier. Very, very useful as you're fighting a big pack of monsters. That quickly just keeps you at full for the duration, a full barrier for the duration of the spell. And then Frost Nova, obviously very defensive and helpful, being able to instantly freeze enemies around you, in addition to boosting your offensive stats through the vulnerable aspect of the spell. Okay, so that's your core setup in terms of skills that are going to help you survive. I bet many of you guys are already, very familiar with that aspect of it. Now, getting into the gearing, I think, is where I found the most success in being able to survive in high nightmare dungeons. And so, just going kind of slot by slot here, I think that there's a few of these slots where sorcs need to prioritize defense, and so I'll start with those two. So the two main slots where you need to pick up defensive roles are your chest and your legs. There are no great offensive stats that you can get on these slots. There are things like you can see, like on mine, I have cold damage. That's not a wonderful thing because it's not a multiplicative source of damage. It just goes into the additive bucket along with almost every other damage boost. So in reality, that's probably less than 5% of a damage boost. I'd much rather have something that gives me 10 to 15 to 20% additional survivability, right? So you'll see that the three other stats that I have on my chest slot are defensive, and these are some of the best defensive stats that you can pick up. Percentage damage reduction from different sources. You get 9.4 damage reduction overall, and then 23 and 23.72 damage reduction from close and distant, respectively. Very powerful. You'll see the defensive aspect there as well. Disobedience, very, very important. Armor is one of the best stats you can pick up for survivability in the game right now. And being able to apply that multiplier. So in my case, plus 45% to your base armor. Very, very useful for mitigation. Okay, the second most important, actually equally important slot that you have for gear is your pants slot, right? Because here in the pants slot, similarly, you want to pick up basically every stat should be a defensive stat. Okay, so you'll see mine like I consider this pretty much perfect. I've got damage reduction from close enemies, a very good roll on it. I've got damage reduction while injured. This one only applies when your HP drops below 35%. For me, I think of this as like a defensive cooldown. If you ever played a game like World of Warcraft, you know how you can basically apply a defensive cooldown that improves your survivability, your toughness by like, let's say 50% for 5 seconds, something like that. This is similar, except that the cooldown is always up if you drop below a certain HP. So that, and it applies on top of any other damage reduction stats that you may have, um, on top of that multiplicatively. So very, very powerful to have. Can mean the difference between life and death in a high nightmare dungeon when something chunks you down to 30%. All of a sudden you gain a big boost in toughness that can keep you alive as you heal up again, right? As you pop your potion and heal up again. So total armor also very valuable. As you guys know, armor one of the most important stats in the game right now. So making sure all of your item slots have as much base armor as possible, and then applying a few multipliers to that armor through rolls like the 10.9% on your armor can be very, very, very useful. Okay, and then maximum life. So once you pick up all these percentage damage reduction slots and pick up the armor, these are all great for mitigation. What do you want to do? You pick up, from that point, you want to pick up some of these maximum life rolls, right? By increasing your HP, that's effectively multiplicatively increasing your survivability. So survivability is a function of your mitigation and your HP pool. So if you improve both of those things, you're going to have a good chance of surviving in higher and higher nightmare dungeons. So that's the most important thing, is these two slots really, really focus on your defense. From there, the other slots where you can focus on defense quite a bit are the helm slot, right? So the helm slot, you do want to pick up something like cooldown reduction for a sorc. That's a great place to get that, like one of the only slots you can get that besides the amulet, besides the offhand. So do get it there, but after you get that, try to get some defensive rolls. I would say pick up at least 2 defensive rolls. You'll see my helm has shadow resistance, which is pretty much useless currently. The resistances are not valuable in the high level dungeons right now. So ideally, I would have liked to have a maximum life roll, or I don't even know if you can roll a percent damage reduction on the helm. I don't think I've seen it very often, if at all. But you do want to try to pick up at least 2 defensive stats on your helm. Okay, but do try to get that CDR as a sorc. That's going to be helpful for helping you stay alive through your defensive skills. Okay, so from there, let's talk about the boot slot. There are some very useful stats you can get on your boots that are not, purely defensive stats. So you can pick up plus skills to some of your defensive stats, defensive skills, and these are actually going to translate into offense, not just defense. So Frost Nova, as you guys know, can proc vulnerable, an AoE vulnerable cast. Very useful for offense, but also defense, right? So being able to freeze everything every few seconds. So picking up additional skill points for Frost Nova will reduce your cooldown, meaning you can cast it more often, meaning you can do more offense, and basically avoid dangerous situations by having that freeze available. The other stat I want to mention is movement speed, right? So 26%. If you get a 26% movement speed, you're that much quicker running out of AOE explosions, dodging attacks and all that sort of stuff. Dodging, what I mean dodging is like running away from a telegraphed attack. So very useful for defense, very useful for overall dungeon clear speed. So I do recommend picking up movement speed and a +2 skill. Frost Nova is a great one. Flame Shield, Teleport even is an option. And then mana cost reduction is important on the boots, right? So it does leave you maybe 1 or 2, depending on what you're trying to do with your build. 1 or 2 rolls on your boots where you could have a defensive stat. I have seen, damage reduction from injured. I think you can also roll, some of the other damage reduction stats that we talked about that are very, very powerful. So, but boots, you do want to consider the fact that you get a lot of utility from movement speed, from the plus ranks to your defensive skill. All right, moving to amulet. This is a really intriguing slot, right? Because you have certain roles that are very, very powerful that you can't pick up anywhere else, right? So right off the bat, you can see +3 ranks to all defensive skills. We're running 4 defensive skills in my build. Many of you guys are probably doing the same. So you're getting a big +3 to all defensive skills you have in your bar. Very, very good for improving uptime of those cooldowns, being able to use those things to escape, to generate barriers, to cast Frost Nova and make things vulnerable. Very, very useful to have that skill. So I'd say that's your priority. Start with an amulet that gives you that, and then start to look at these other things. For survivability, cooldown reduction is quite important. We talked about same reason as the plus to defensive skills. You want to bring that those cooldowns down, and so having those two things are both going to do that for you. From there, mana cost reduction is something that a lot of people are going to pick up, just to make their builds smooth out in terms of how they're playing high level dungeons. You don't want to be running dry and not being able to cast your blizzard, for example, if you're a blizzard sorc. Blizzard is also a defensive tool because your blizzard's going to chill, then eventually freeze, right? As you're continually chilling, the enemies then become frozen after a couple of seconds. So very useful defensively. You can't do that if you run out of mana. So it is important to have a couple of those mana cost reduction rolls. And then you have a 4th slot that could, for me, I decided to pick up an offensive boost in the +3 to Icy Touch skill. You could also pick up a defensive stat here, right? So on the amulet slot, you can pick up a +% damage reduction to distance, to close, I think even to injured. I've seen even the % damage reduction overall, which is very powerful. You could get like 10% damage reduction, which is very, very good and a very solid option if you're trying to stay alive. Okay. Ring slots are going to be primarily offensively oriented. So definitely, you're going to see a lot of people running crit strike chance, crit strike damage like I am in both slots. And then resource regeneration. This is like one of the only slots where you can actually get that stat. And it's very, very powerful for making sure you don't run out of mana. So my top 3 stats are crit strike chance, crit strike damage, and resource generation. You'll see I have all 3 of those on these rings. In terms of defensive stats, on the rings, uniquely, as you can on a couple of your armor slots, you can pick up maximum life here, and it's a very big maximum life roll. So you'll see on one of my rings, I have plus 1,100 maximum life, and that's very useful, right? So again, with survivability being a function of your mitigation and your HP pool, if you can boost your HP through a couple of these rolls like I have, so I have 2 maximum, basically almost top end rolls for maximum life. And then of course I'm running these rubies in my armor. It gives me a fairly large HP pool that is then mitigated through these defensive, multiplicative defense reduction, damage reduction rolls that I have. So that's how I achieve the survivability that I have on my sorc. It's mainly a combination of the skills and the gearing decisions. Make sure you are prioritizing defense in the slots where you can't get any good offensive stats. Don't go for the additive sources of damage if you can avoid it. Make sure you're focusing on these percentage-based damage reduction attributes. Avoid resistances for now. They're not currently, as the formulas are set up within the game, the algorithms, they're not factoring into high-level dungeon survivability. So focus on these percentage reductions, focus on your armor, focus on your life, and you'll do very, very well in the high-end dungeons. And again, have a look at my video where I go through the level 62 to 66 dungeons to get a sense for like how much damage you would take running this sort of a setup. Uh, there's a link also to my build where you can see the Paragon choices on the Paragon board. You'll see that the Paragon board is mainly offensive oriented to help me get the most possible damage there. But I do pick up some of those rare nodes that are focused on things like reducing damage from chilled. Um, there are some nodes that are adding some maximum life, 2% maximum life, 5% maximum life. Do go for those if they're on the way to the glyphs that you need to open up. But besides that, I mean, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, how it's going, if this is working for you as well, surviving on your Sorc. And yeah, give me a thumbs up if you thought this was helpful information for you as well. Thanks for watching.